Now is that one session that I personally cannot wait for more. Like, I cannot wait for the session to start. With us is one of the masterclass trainers from yesterday. His name is Kendal Haven, and he wrote the two books that you see behind me, Story Smart, Story Proof, Story Smart, and Story Proof. Anyway, this one here and this one here so that I'm clearer, all right? He is going to bring you, this is, by the way, warning, this is not a session, a beginner session. This is an advanced session on storytelling, because everything that we are going to be talking about is how story impacts the human's brain, okay? This is incredibly interesting stuff for everyone, so let's welcome Kendall Haven to the conference. Mr. Haven, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. What we want to talk about in the next few minutes is, well, it's really fun to talk about your brain and how your brain processes incoming information. But what you really care about are everyone else's brain, right? The people you need to communicate with. So we want to see how their brains actually process information, and then how you can control it. What are the tools you have to control it? So I want to begin real simply with saying hi to everyone. And I know we're all muted, and if we were in a conference room, we could go around a circle and do this. But since we're going to be together for 45 minutes, I'm going to say hi to you. And then, as if you were passing it on to the next person, everyone here, if you'd unmute for just a moment, everyone here is then going to shout the greeting back at me as if you were passing it on to the next person. I'll say hi, I'll give the greeting to you. I'll say 1, 2, go. And at that point, if everyone attending the session could pass the greeting on as if they were passing it on to someone else, there is only one rule. When you say it and pass it on, you must say it differently than either I do, or if possible, than anyone else attending the conference says it. Got it? Your job, say it, but say it differently than I do, differently than anyone else does. And I'll show you something about your brain and about the brains of people that you work with. Are you ready?
Kendall, one stop here. I need to stop you here for a second. They need to do that in the chat, because they're not in the Cisco WebEx platform that you're seeing. So let them do that in the chat through words.
Do it in the chat. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, in the chat. Are you ready? Hi. 1, 2, go. All right, we should be piling up all sorts of things in the chat now. And Boris, if you're looking at some of what they said, or can see what they said in the chat,
yes, I can.
Seeing what I think I would be seeing?
They are saying, hey, zdrasti moj čovek, hey, aloha, greetings, dear, hey, hi, hello, ahoy. Whoa,
that's
it is crazy.
Good.
Hey, sir,
Did you notice?
Whoa, it's crazy.
That almost every one of you violated the one and only rule I gave you. I said, say, quote, hi, unquote, and say it differently. But when we speak, don't think about how we're going to say something very much. We think about what we're going to say, the content. And so in your mind, you literally change, in order to make it make sense to you, changed what I said from say hi and say it differently to say something different, which completely changed the meaning of the rule that I gave you. It happens all the time. It happens automatically at a subconscious level, and it distorts and therefore prevents effective communication daily. So I want to show you a little bit more about that process and how it works, and then give you the tools to overcome it. The key question here then is not Did I say what I wanted to say? I said what I wanted to say. That's not the key question. The key question is, did you hear what I needed for you to hear? The answer is no. Whose fault is it? Of course, it's mine. It's my job to make sure that in your conscious mind and memory, you hear what I want you to hear. So let's do a couple more little demos on how your brain makes sense out of incoming information. Let's look at your mind in action. Person number one says, "Where's John?" Person number two says, "Well, I didn't want to say anything, but I saw a green VW parked in front of Carol's." Got it? Person number one, "Where's John?" Person number two, "Well, I didn't want to say anything, but I saw a green VW parked in front of Carol's." Now, if you would, real quickly in the chat boxes, write down what's going on here and what's the relationship between the two people who speak, person number one and person number two, and John, who is spoken about, and Carol, who is spoken about. Give you 30 seconds or so to do that. Now, of course, the point is, how many of you said there is absolutely no connection between those two? I can't possibly answer the two questions you were asked. Probably none of you did, because our brains automatically infer connections and imply story elements to make that kind of information make sense. All right. So the answer is, the human mind automatically assumes the connection and makes it make sense. We do it in story terms. Understand those terms and you'll understand far better how your audiences understand what you do. Let me show you one more demo. Then I'm going to go back to that one and show you some of the assumptions that you made automatically in order to make it make sense. But for this one, picture yourself standing in a corner of some kind of a social event or a hallway, a conference. You're standing at a conference, and when back in the old days when you could actually go live, and you hear this conversation happen. Person number one says, "Hi, John." Person number two says, "Shh, I'm not here. You never saw me. I'm not here." Person number one says, "Oh, that's okay. Carol's gone home." Now, if you overheard that conversation, you'd know how to make perfect sense out of it. You would assume person number two is John. And what John is really saying is, keep it quiet. I don't want to be seen. There's certain people I don't want to bump into today. Person number one, who understands the situation, said, "It's okay. Carol's gone home. You're safe. You don't have to hide." Right? That's not what it says. You had to mentally completely reverse the meaning of every statement that person number two made in order to make it make sense. And I bet you didn't hesitate a microsecond in doing it. You did it automatically, you did it subconsciously, and probably never even considered the possibility that person number two is telling the truth. Well, let's go back and look at the first one for just a second. Here we are. If you take it literally, all you can assume is that poor person number two either didn't hear the question or has lost all touch with reality, because they were asked about a person, John, and are talking about a car. There's no connection between them until you create a link between John and a green VW. And you probably also created a goal and a motive for John in going over to visit Carol. Those were all creations of your neural story net. It's part of the brain that we have discovered and worked to uncover its function and its option. So let's go forward again. One more time. I want to show you three sentences. Watch your brain as you hear these three sentences. He went to the store. Fred died. Sharon went hungry and wept. Now, can't you just feel your brain starting to connect them together in a story? create some sequencing, create why Sharon went hungry and wept, and left it related to Fred who died, and Fred to going to the store. And your brain automatically, there's a mandate, the make sense mandate, that says that your brain must make sense out of incoming information or ignore it. The way that our brains are wired, you do it in very specific story terms. That's what I want to show you. But first, a question. How do we do it? How do you make up those how do you make those connections? Where does that information come from that suddenly appears in your mind to make those kinds of situations make sense to you? Well, the answer is there are two sources. The source material, that is, if you're speaking, it's your story. That's the source material. And your audience, your TA is target audience. Your target audience is banks of prior knowledge. They fill, your audience members, as you just did, fill in all the gaps around all of the holes in the information by making specific story-based assumptions and inferences to make the source material, where it is incomplete, into a complete story-based input of material. Well, I want to show you how powerful those banks of prior knowledge are, and then show you those elements. So the prior knowledge, that is to say, your banks of prior knowledge believe everything you know, everything you think you know, all of your experiences, all of your learning, everything that's stored in your brain becomes part of your banks of prior knowledge. That's what you use to fill in gaps in the incoming information and create complete stories. So what you do with those banks of prior knowledge is create context, that is to say, show how new information relates to what you already know, and relevance, the most important one. What does this mean to me? How does it relate to what's important to me right now? If you can create context and relevance for your information, the research shows that it is 8 to 10 times more likely to be remembered and recalled accurately. So let's look at how powerful that those banks of prior knowledge really are. I want to show you 7 groups of letters, just regular old letters, 7 groups. And it turns out there are 20 letters in them. I've never actually counted. I take that on faith that there are 20 letters there, but I'm going to give you 10 seconds to memorize those 7 groups. See how many you can memorize in 10 seconds. Ready? Go. How'd you do? When I've tested people, the average is getting just under 10 of the letters correct. That is to say, about half the groups. However, all I have to do is change the order, change the spacing between the letters, not the letters, not the order of the letters, to invoke your banks of prior knowledge. The reason it's difficult now is because those groups have no relationship to anything. You just had to flat memorize them. You couldn't use your existing banks of prior knowledge to benefit from them. But if I just change the spacing between them, all of a sudden, they're easy to remember. Why? Because for most people, for many people, these groups of letters relate to their banks of prior knowledge. So I've created a context for them that makes it easy. Okay? That's prior knowledge in action. I want to show you one more demo of that. Here are 7 sentences. John walked on the roof. Bill picked up the eggs. Pete hid the axe. Jim flew a kite. Frank built the boat. Harvey flipped an electric switch. And Ted wrote a play. Can you remember them all? And they were pretty simple declarative sentences, right? Comprehension was no problem. The problem, though, is that there's no context or relevance for those sentences. So in order to remember them, you had to flat memorize them. Human minds aren't that good at memorizing words. In fact, we tend to be really lousy at memorizing and remembering words. But if I change the names, it's easy to remember who built the boat or who flipped the switch, just by changing the names. Santa Claus walked on the roof. Easter Bunny picked up the eggs. A little American one. George Washington hit the axe. Ben Franklin flew the kite. Electrical trivia there. Noah built the boat. Edison flipped the switch. Shakespeare wrote the play. Now it's easy. That's your banks of prior knowledge in action. So, in order to have people make sense of your material the way you want them to, the question is, and this was a research question that I spent about 8 years researching and uncovering, what are the informational elements that the brain automatically, naturally uses to make sense of incoming information? And it happens in the lower back part of the brain as part of the initial processing. It actually happens before information ever gets to your conscious mind. By the time information first gets to your conscious mind, you have already converted it into story form and forced it to make sense without even knowing that you did it. You distorted the incoming information, as you did with those little demos that we've done. People do it to you when you speak all the time. If you can get in the habit of creating, that is to say, articulating these 8 elements and building them into your presentation, you give the essential information to the neural story net of your audience, and they will make sense of your material the way you want them to, because they won't have to infer out of their own banks of prior knowledge. Well, there are 8 of these elements. They're all very simple. This is the good news. You actually already know them because your brain is hardwired to use these elements. It's a question of bringing them up into your conscious mind so that you can design them into the pieces that you create. I'm going to show them to you, and I won't quite do it in the numerical sequence as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll jump around a little bit because it makes the story, as we develop it, a little more fun. So let's start with something very simple. He went to the store. All right? That's not a good story yet. It's not gripping. It's not engaging. You're not going to remember it. Effective stories get remembered. That's what you want to create. So first thing we need to create for he, in that he went to the store, is the question of a goal. Why did he go to the store? What did he go to the store for? That's called a goal. It is the essence, the heart and soul of every effective story. We want to know why characters do what they do. So the goal, by definition, is what the character needs or wants to do or get in this story. It's what they're after. It's not necessarily what they actually wind up doing. It's not what they accomplish, although it might be, but it is what they are after. It's what drives them through the story. Goals, to be effective, need to be physical, tangible. They need to be visualizable. Peace on earth it would be a great thing, but it's a lousy goal. We're not quite sure what it looks like. Happiness is a terrible goal because we don't know what it looks like, so we can't visualize it. You want to create goals for your characters that are visualizable by your audience. There's a place for happiness and peace on earth. We'll get to it in a minute. So I want to demonstrate goal real quickly. The power of a goal. Here's a paragraph. I'll read it to you. As you listen to it, the question is, does this make sense to you? Sally let loose a team of gophers. The plan backfired when a dog chased them away. She then threw a party, but her guests failed to bring their motorcycles. Furthermore, her stereo system wasn't nearly loud enough. Sally spent the next day looking for a peeping Tom, but was unable to find one in the yellow pages of the telephone book. Obscene phone calls gave her some hope until the number was changed. It was the installation of a blinking neon light across the street that finally did the trick. Sally framed the ad for that light that she found in the classified section of her newspaper and now has it hanging on her wall. Does it make sense? Do you get it? Of course not. What you have here is just plot, sequence of events. But it doesn't make sense because there's no goal. Stories are about characters and their goals. Events have no meaning to the audience until we see them within the context of a goal. So let's give Sally a goal. Sally hates the woman who moved in next door. That actually is called motive. We'll get to that part in a minute. And here's what she wants. Wants or needs to do or get, that's the goal, wants to drive her out. Reread the paragraph and it will make perfect sense. Just because you have a goal. You may disagree with Sally's tactics, but it will make perfect sense because you have a goal. That is how powerful a goal is. And so often, when people are doing talks and presenting information, they forget to talk about the goal of the character and leave it up to the audience to infer it. And they almost always infer incorrectly, and so misinterpret everything that you provide. So let's go to the he went to the store. We have to give him a goal. He went to the store for some milk. He got some. The end. All right, better, but it's not very exciting yet, is it? Because we don't have a full and complete story yet. The next element we need to consider are conflicts and problems. These are the things that keep him from getting his milk. If he went to the store for some milk, he can't have already gotten it, right? He can't have got, initially, he doesn't have the milk. So something at that point must be keeping him from getting milk. That's conflicts and problems. By definition, anything that blocks a character, even momentarily, from reaching a goal is a problem. A conflict is a subset of problem. Conflict are problems that place our character in direct opposition to another character. There are always an abundance of problems and conflicts that that are scattered along every pathway, every development, every project. If there weren't, you wouldn't have needed budget, you wouldn't have needed staff, you just jump straight to the end. Stories are about characters facing problems and conflicts, but problems and conflicts themselves don't create excitement. They don't create tension and engagement in the story. Let me demonstrate that. And I think the best thing you can do is think of, if you don't like the words problems and conflicts, think of them as obstacles that you have to overcome. So let's create a conflict for he went to the store. He went to the store for some milk. A golden butterfly perched on the door handle and twitched its wings and hissed, "You can't come in." So he brushed the butterfly aside, stepped inside, got his milk, went home. The end. That was conflict. Not very exciting, was it? Because it's not the conflict itself, not the problems themselves we care about. What is it? It is the risk and the danger that they create. And these are one of the elements that most people forget to use to take advantage of. Risk and danger are what create excitement and tension in a story. They are your great tools for holding the attention of an audience. Let's define our terms. Risk is the probability of failure, the likelihood that something's going to go wrong. The more likely it is that something's going to go wrong, the greater the excitement, the greater the tension, the greater the attention. And we also find in the lab, the greater the empathy that is created for that character, the more people in the audience tend to identify with that character and vicariously experience the story through their eyes. Danger. Danger is the consequences of failure. It's what happens to you when something goes wrong. The greater the danger, the same thing is true. Risk and danger plot, and when we're in an EEG lab monitoring test audiences, plot exactly with tension and engagement. And yet most people try to brush risk and danger under the rug and therefore lose the engagement, lose the attention of their audiences. These are your magic ingredients for holding attention and creating engagement. So these things, problems and conflicts, they always are there. They are challenges along the way. Use them. And I mean any kind of danger will do. Emotional, mental, social, physical, any one of them will do. So those kinds of dangers that we all face every day, fears, embarrassment, ridicule, these are the kind of dangers that beset your stories. The likelihood that they occur, that's what besets your life, and it should be the things you look for in developing your stories. So let's create some risk and danger before he went to the store for his milk. Went to the store for the milk. Butterfly perched on the door handle, said, "You can't come in." With a high-pitched whistle, the butterfly summoned his swarm of Africanized killer bees who blocked the front door and threatened his life. So He's no dummy. He walked around to the back door of the store, walked in, got his milk, went home. The end. Aren't you? Don't you want to boo? Don't you want to say, no, 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 you can't do that in the story? Because one of the elements that your brain automatically requires is struggle. Struggle. You want characters to struggle. By definition, it means to contend. You know what struggle means. So if I'm going to put the risk and danger in the story, you expect, your brain requires that characters face it. That's struggle. Sticky stories, if it's going to stick with the audience, requires struggle. The greater the struggle, the greater the engagement, the greater the story tension, the greater the excitement, the more we tend to become viscerally, personally involved with the story. Make your characters struggle. Don't make it easy on them. Even if it's you and your company that you're talking about, the more your company's had to struggle to get where it is, the more empathy, the more support you will receive as you tell the story to an audience. So struggle how? Internally, externally, right? Doesn't matter. Any struggle will do. So let's make him struggle. Here come the Africanized killer bees, and he risked his life swatting and slapping the bees to force his way into the store, straight through the attacking bees, into the store. He got his milk, went home. The end. Aren't you wondering why in the world he'd risk his life for a liter of milk? I mean, really, couldn't he have his chocolate cake without milk for once? Why risk your life? What you're missing is the other of the two most critical of these elements. That critical in the sense that it's the least used, the least developed, and the most underutilized, and that is motive. Motive. What is motive? Actually, motive is the information that explains why a goal is critically important to the character. This is where happiness, this is where family loyalty, this is where values, beliefs, attitudes, cultural norms all belong. This is where you get to talk about what lies behind the goal. What we find is that audiences at a subconscious automatic level always try to infer and ferret out exactly what the motives are behind the actions of every character, and then make this comparison. Are those motives that I believe are driving that character, do they match my motives? That is to say, my values, attitudes, beliefs, my cultural norms, my priorities, or not? If they do, we start to identify with that character every time. If we say that they don't, we turn against that character every time. That is the incredible power of motives. Motives are what define identity. Do we identify with a character or don't we? So they also create suspense in the story. Suspense and excitement are the two things that create tension in a story. I want to demo quickly how powerful motives are. Well, let's have a character, Sharky, the shark, wanted a puppy. That's character and goal. And then we ask the question, why does he want a puppy? That gets us to motive. That's the why question gets us always to motives. I want to show you 4 different motives. Watch how changing from motive to motive changes your attitude toward the character. Sharky wanted a shark. Oh, I'm going too fast. I'll go these one at a time. He wanted a puppy because he was tired of doing chores. Let the puppy come down and do the work for a while. All right, don't like that one? How's about this? He wanted a puppy because he was tired of eating tuna. A little hot dog on a stick. All right, don't like that one? What about he was lonely and needed a friend? I guess he'd eaten all of his other friends and he needed a new one. All right, don't like that one? He wanted to show that land and sea animals could live in peace. Doesn't that one just make you say, oh, please, and push you right out of the story. My point is, change motive. You change the way the audience relates to the character. Now, I'm going to give you a motive for he went to the store for this milk. I'm willing to bet so far you really don't care a lot about him or his trip to the store, the Africanized killer bees. It's sort of mildly amusing, but you don't really care. Watch what happens when I give him a motive. The reason you don't care yet is because you haven't gotten a motive for him. So often in doing presentations, people don't talk about the values, the beliefs that underlie their goals, their wants, and their actions. All right, let's give him a motive. Before I do, that's right. One of the point I wanted to make. If you don't give us motives, what happens? Well, the neural story net, that part of the brain that does that initial processing of incoming information to make it make sense, requires a motive. So it will infer one. And here's what we find in the lab when we research it. One, I slightly over-exaggerated here. We will almost always be wrong because we tend to always assume motives that are negative. That is to say, self-serving motives, narcissistic one, even sarcastic and cruel motives. That's what people tend to assume. And so look at your characters. If you're talking about if you're doing a presentation and you're the main character, they'll look at you and your company's motives as being negative and self-serving. And so they'll flip the story and turn on you as opposed to supporting and identifying with you. And it's all because you haven't included the motives. So now let's give he who went to the store for some milk a motive. Watch how it changes the way you view the story. He went to the store for some milk that would keep his deathly ill son alive until the doctor arrived. Doesn't that change the way you look at the story? Aren't you rooting for him a little more now to fight his way through those bees? Aren't you willing to say, yeah, I do that for my kid? Aren't you starting to identify with him? That's the power of motive. Don't ever, ever think that you can get by ignoring motive, because your audience at a subconscious automatic level certainly won't ignore it. All right, so we're getting along. Now we're still missing a couple of these elements. I skipped over 1 and 2. You notice that? Because in our first sentence, we had the words, he went to the store. He is a character. I implied a character. If I just said gone to the store, your first question would have been, who went to the store? I would have had to start with number 1, because the truth is all stories are about characters, period. All effective stories are character-based, not event-based, not information-based. They center around characters. Information and events become relevant to the audience only as they relate to and pertain to the struggles of a character to face risk and danger, to overcome problems and conflicts, to get to a goal that's important to them. So number 1 is the characters, the individuals that occupy the key character positions in our story, and the character traits, those little bits of information, right, about the characters that make them memorable enough so that we can keep track of them and treat them as individuals, treat them as separate, unique entities. So let's give him some characteristics. I kind of went overboard on this. Bob, a kindly bald man, bald ever since his severe reaction to a wasp sting. I'm trying to create more risk and danger for him here. Lurched to the store on his skateboard using his crutches to propel him down the street, since one leg and arm were in casts after his Coke bottle thick glasses fell off, leaving him virtually blind and causing him to tumble down the front stairs. I'm trying to increase risk and danger, make it less likely that he'll succeed, that is to say, increasing risk, and also increasing the likelihood that he's going to get hurt and that it will really be a catastrophic kind of a hurt when he is increasing danger. Make the story a little more fun. So we're down to one last question. What makes a story sound real? It is not that it really happened. Children who are trying to make up excuses for their parents have learned this long ago. You can say exactly what happened and it'll sound phony and you get punished. You think, well, I told the truth. Why did I get punished? It's not that it really happened that makes it sound real. What makes it sound real? Details. Sensory details. What it looked like, sound like, smell like, felt like. That's the way you get information about the world, is through your senses. If you can provide the same information, details, you will create pictures in the mind of your audience, because it is the details that create the pictures. The pictures, if they are vivid and rich and expansive, make the story seem real to the receiver, because that's the kind of an image we'd get when we experience something ourselves and gather information through our own senses. Details then create a sense of reality. They're what make the story seem real, and they are what then build the pictures in people's minds. So the key is to find those moments in your story, in your presentation, that you need people to really see in their brains vividly and remember. There is also research that says the greater the density of sensory details associated with an image, the greater the likelihood that it will be filed into memory, long-term memory, in such a way so that it will be readily and accurately recalled. Detail creates memory. And so the question is, what details about the characters, any of the sensory details about the scenes, about the settings where things happen, and about the events themselves, the actions in the story. Those that you want us to remember must be provided in detail. So there they are. Those are the 8 elements. We have a character that is of interest to us, that has a goal, that's backed up by some important motive, values, beliefs, attitudes, norms that make that goal critically important to the character and relevant to the audience. The pathway there is blocked by some combination of problems and conflicts that create risk and danger. Don't you love that dragon? The character then must struggle to try to get through, over, around, past those problems, facing risk and danger to get to the goal that's important to them. That is what your brain and the brain of every person you will ever try to communicate with is hardwired to use to make sense out of incoming information. If you want them to make sense of your information the way you want them to, you need to provide those 8 elements to them in your source material, your presentation, your blog post. All right? So again, the 8 elements: the characters who populate the key character positions, the traits that make those characters seem like real, unique individuals, a goal, the heart and soul of every story, what the character needs or wants to do or get, motives, those drivers that create identity, that are so important to engaging the audience and having them look at the story the way you want them to, and then the conflicts and problems and risk and danger that create excitement, that give the story something to talk about, and then last, the other 2, the struggles and the details. That's it. Those are the elements. If you wanted to see the bare bones version, blank, an interesting character, needed blank, a goal, because blank, motive, but blank, problems and conflicts, risk and danger, so blank, this is where we put in the struggles, the actions, the events the character undertakes to try to overcome risk and danger, overcome conflicts and problems, facing risk and danger, and then finally we come back to the resolution point, and at the resolution we have to do 2 things: resolve the goal. Does the main character achieve that goal? Yes or no? And how do they feel about it? That's going to guide the audience to decide how they feel about the story, and that residual feeling, the way they feel at the end of the story, is what drives the impact and the influence that that story has over them. That's it. Those are the elements. Again, these are the elements that the brain is naturally, automatically hardwired And we can see these little subregions of the brain in action when we're in fMRI and EEG labs. These are the parts of the brain that the mind is hardwired to use, to rely on, to make sense out of, and then create meaning from incoming information, including your incoming information. If you get in the habit of using them, that is your ticket to more effective communication. So I will stop there. We've still got 4 minutes left for questions, thoughts, comments. Do we have any of those coming in?
Yep, we have such. And one of them came 25 minutes ago. Okay, so it was more or less at the beginning of the session when you were talking about the prior knowledge and that idea that everything is, that part is super important in order for us to communicate a message effectively. And here is the question though. Isn't everyone's source material, meaning the fact that between us and the audience, our banks of prior knowledge are different, except if, right? Except if we don't have a shared experience, right? Now,
And
having that in mind, that everyone's bank of prior knowledge is different, what do we do?
Okay, and the answer is that there are far more commonalities than differences in the banks of knowledge, banks of prior knowledge. In particular, first concept, all effective stories are target audience specific. The most effective thing you can do in prepping your material is think, who's my target audience? What do I know about them? What do they have in common? In particular, what the kinds of questions you want to start with are, what do they currently believe about this topic that I'm going to present? What do they currently think? What do they currently believe, and why? What is it specifically that I want to change? Is it some attitude? Is it a behavior that I want to change? Get them to adopt? Is it an attitude? Is it a belief? What are the, so if you can answer the question, what is my this group that I want to reach? What attitudes do they currently have? And you'll find that when you get to that level, target audiences can be characterized and they can be grouped with common beliefs, attitudes, values, and sets of knowledge that relate to a specific topic. Once you do that, then you say, why do they believe what they currently believe? And what is it specifically that I want to address and change? And you find that you can whittle it down to some very specific, manageable targets for your presentation and the target attitudes, beliefs, values that you need to affect and to modify in order to create the behavioral change that you're really trying to induce in that target audience. So look for the commonalities, don't look for the unique parts, and you'll find that there are far more commonalities in any given target audience, even if it's an international group, than there are differences.
Brilliant. And one more, I don't know, let's see. I am not sure whether or not we have enough time for that one, but still let's answer it. If we don't have the time, please let us know, but please promise us to join Hopin and then answer Milena, who is asking that question, because it's a question that I think just requires more time. However, she says that those examples that you gave to illustrate the story mechanics, the 8 components, are very insightful. However, she was hoping to see how those 8 components are applied to a story from the business world, right? Do you have one story like that in mind? Can we fit it in the next 1 or 2 minutes?
Wow. And the answer is they fit into every story. And so let's take a story about, an internal corporate story, changing a benefit package. And so the story would be that you're changing a benefit package, and you think, well, okay, who do I want to tell the story about? Do I want to tell it from the viewpoint of the company? Who's my target audience? It would be the frontline workers. All right, I've got frontline workers, and I'm changing a benefit package. So what do they currently believe? they currently believe that their benefit package is well, let's say they like their current doctors, they like their current package, but I'm changing to a different insurance company because it saves me a bunch of money. And so I would say their current belief is that the system is good the way it is and they don't want to change. I want to convince them that they'll be better off with this new system. So that's my goal. My goal is to show them that they'll be better off with this new system. Who's going to be the main character of my story? I'll make it about them. And what do they want? They want to be taken care of. They want their families to be taken care of. So that's their goal. And motives. My motive for changing is because it'll save the company money, and I think their care will be as good. Their motive is always then to say, gee, I want my family to be healthy. I want my family to be well. I don't want to have any surprises. I don't want to have a lot of medical bills. Who's the antagonist here? For me, the antagonist, the problems, conflicts, risk, and danger have to do with financial burdens that are growing and mounting and making me and my products non-competitive in the marketplace. So the survival of the company is at stake. For them, the problems that they face have to do with trying to get by me and the company and the HR department. So I'm building the story in those terms and then saying, how can I word this? How can I frame this information about the change so that it appears to be, from their point of view, advantageous, so that it gives them something that they want. And if I can't afford, let's say that if I keep with my current insurance policy and my current insurance system, that golly gee, the company just can't afford it. I'd have to dump it and no one would have any company provided insurance at all. So I say, what I want to preserve is the benefit to the families, benefit to you, to your family, to keep them well. And in order to do that, we have to make this other change. But as I'm structuring my material, I'm always thinking, who are the characters? What are their goals? What do they need? What do they want? Why do they want that? What do they think what do they think are the challenges? What do they think are the problems that they face? And then I'm trying to weave through those elements as I'm piecing together the information that I'm going to assemble and present to them. But it's just looking at those elements, those same elements in every situation.
Yeah.
How is that for doing it did we get that in 2 minutes?
Yeah, we managed, or you managed,
So
to be honest.
just a quick demo. It's a way, it really, as opposed to thinking of story as the product, think of story as the process.
All right.
Story is the process of looking at your information in story terms. Who are the characters? What are their goals? What are their motives? What drives them? What are their fears? What are their risks? What are their dangers? What problems and conflicts do they face? How do I overcome those? It's really about process, the way you approach and plan your material, far more than it is about the product, the final delivery that you present.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, thanks so much again for joining us. We're out of time, but we managed to answer everything. However, I will encourage you to join the Hopin chat and see the reactions of people and see their comments, because I think you will be very pleasantly surprised by them. Now, the next session, Kendall, again, final words. Thank you so much for joining for the masterclass and now for the 45-minute session. This is, again, for me at least, even today, this is something that's not a beginner's topic, but an advanced topic. But as you said, once you master it, then everything changes, right? Everything changes.
Because this is how our brains, we should be teaching this to every student at every grade in every country. Unfortunately, we're not.
Yeah.
But now we know how the brain makes sense of it, creates meaning from incoming information, and it provides powerful tools for you to use.
Yeah. That is truly, truly incredible.
Enjoy them.
Yeah, the research that you have done is just plain and simple incredible. Highly recommend everyone to check out his book Story Proof and Story Smart.